I'm Eben and we're going to talk about mastering your money. And this is really part of a bigger conversation that we've been having about money and about how little most of us have learned about money and wealth and success. And hopefully what I'm going to do here is give you some insights into how you can better master money and wealth and really take control of this area of your life. So question, what's wrong with this picture? Most people who inherit money or win the lottery lose it all, and often very quickly. Most people who graduate from college don't work in their field, right, in their field of study. Turns out that winning the long-term game of wealth is very different from winning the short-term game of money. So you've probably seen this yourself, maybe even experienced it. People who inherit the money, win the lottery, come into money somehow, often lose it very quickly. And this other side of the coin, even when we kind of try to do it the right way, we go to college, we study a field, we graduate with a degree, and we don't wind up working in our fields. Something is wrong with this picture. There's something going on underneath the surface that most of us are never alerted to, we are never aware of. The real picture isn't what we're told. It's not what we hear. Again, winning the long-term game of wealth is very different from winning the short-term game of money. And what I'd like to suggest to you here is that money and wealth are two different things. I'd like to really draw this distinction for you. In order to create wealth, you must first understand money. So the analogy I'll give you is that there's a difference between words and sentences. Okay? A difference between words and sentences. In order to make a sentence, you need to understand words and know how to use them, but a sentence is much bigger than just words. Well, in this analogy, money is like the words and wealth is the sentences. In order to build wealth, you must understand money, but you also really have to get that wealth is not money. It's not simply money. If you've seen some of the free reports and free videos and exercises that I've released, then you've seen what I call money's dirty secrets. And what I thought we would do is just recap them quickly to set a foundation for the material we're going to cover here. Okay, so money's first secret is that it has a hole in its own bucket. Okay, money has a hole in its own bucket. So what do I mean by this? Well, I mean that when we use money, we lose money just by using it. And this is because whenever we turn our value or our time or our assets into money, there are a whole bunch of toll booths and hidden fees along the way. If you take money as income, you have to pay taxes on it. If you invest in the stock market and then you sell your stock to take profit, it turns into money. You have to pay fees. You have to pay all kinds of hidden tolls and taxes behind the scenes. And even more importantly, there's this thing called inflation. And I find it really interesting that we hear this word all the time, but most people don't know what inflation is. And inflation, really the technical definition is that our money gets diluted because we increase the money supply. We print more of it, or we just declare that there's more. Or banks create money through the fractional reserve system, where they get some money, you deposit some money with them, and then they can just create more money that they can lend out of thin air. So governments and banks create money out of thin air. They dilute the money that's in circulation, and now the value of our money goes down. So money has a hole in its own bucket, and just by using money, we lose money. This is quite distressing for most people because we've always been kind of taught that money is value and money is wealth. And to understand that it's exactly the opposite of that, right, is very confusing. The next of money's dirty secrets is that we're not wired to succeed with it. We're not wired to succeed with it. Okay, so what could I possibly mean here? Well, this means that the way that we are wired biologically is not to be successful with money. After spending many years now studying cognitive science and evolutionary psychology and some of these other interesting disciplines like neuroeconomics, what I've learned is that the way that we're wired is to live in a different time. We're wired to live in an environment that doesn't exist anymore for most of us. We evolved in a very different set of circumstances. Now we live inside of cities. We work in jobs. We deal with money. This is not the way that we're wired. And when we come across money, and especially when we come across more complex things like debt and interest rates and interest on debt and so forth, it's just too much for us, and we wind up losing. The next of money's dirty secrets is we emotionally self-sabotage. Whenever we have to make a big, important financial decision, we usually become emotional. So we get very excited with desire, or we become very afraid. We become filled with fear. And whenever we're feeling a strong emotion, that's a bad time to make a financial decision. And so what we do is we emotionally self-sabotage. When we buy things, we pay too much. When we sell them, we get too little. We trade our time for too little money. When it's time to negotiate, we get filled with emotion and we make the wrong decision. And emotional self-sabotage really costs us in the long run. The next of money's dirty secrets, we got the wrong story about it. We got the wrong story about it. And what I mean here is that most of us, when we were growing up, the story, or the lessons that we got about money and wealth were not ones that will help us create money and create wealth. My earliest impressions around money were mostly conflict and negative emotions. For a lot of us, we did not grow up with role models, for most of us, that helped us become successful. They didn't teach us how to use our money to create wealth, how to get money, how to get wealth, how to really develop these things. And these stories became our mythology, and they're affecting us now into our adult lives. And we now have unconscious programming and beliefs and storylines that we're playing out from childhood, and these wrong stories prevent us from ever getting ahead. And then the final of money's dirty secrets, probably my favorite, is that millionaires are regular people. And this comes from some of the work of Dr. Thomas Stanley, who studied the affluent for many years, wrote a series of books about marketing and selling to the affluent. And then he really had his home run with the book, The Millionaire Next Door, which you may have heard of. And what he did there is he went and studied millionaires and interviewed them to find out who they really were, and realized that most millionaires were essentially regular people. And if they were in a crowd, you wouldn't be able to pick them out. And that they're not these, jet-setting rock star types that are always spending a lot of money on clothes and food and fancy cars, that they dress in conservative clothing, they drive used cars, and they do work that looks relatively normal from the outside. More than average number of them own their own businesses, but they're usually just doing things that don't look that sensational. But this is a very positive piece of news, because what it means is that we can take control of this area of life, that we can make different choices, that we can take what we're given, and we can become very, very successful. Millionaires are regular people. Most millionaires are self-made, meaning that they're first generation. They made their own money. So on one side of the coin, you've got most people that come into money or win the lottery, lose it. But on the other side of the coin, most wealthy people, most people that are millionaires, made their money themselves, and we can do it too. We're not wired for success with money. How are we wired backwards for money and wealth success? Well, here are two typical money mistakes that people make. I know I've made both of these mistakes a lot in my life, but I want to point out that this isn't to, point a finger at you or say that you're bad or you're stupid. It's just to show how doing things that seem like they make perfect sense can actually lead to big problems. Okay, so here are two typical money mistakes. The first one is buying on credit, expecting to earn more in the future. And the second is raising your credit limit or keeping extra credit cards as insurance. All right, so it only makes sense that you would buy something on credit expecting to earn more in the future. I mean, that's why you're buying on credit, because you don't have the money and you expect to earn more money in the future, right? Very logical. What happens when we buy on credit is typically that we don't earn more money in the future. Okay, we don't earn more money, or our expenses go up, so we don't have extra money to use to pay off that bill, and we just get further into debt. What about raising your credit limit or keeping extra credit cards as insurance? I mean, that seems to make a lot of logical sense, doesn't it? Of course it does, right? What if something bad happens? You want to have that little bit of cushion. The problem here, the reason why this is a mistake, is that usually once we get that extra credit or that extra credit card, we have something come up and we spend that money. We go and we use that credit. Okay, we don't save it for a rainy day. Something happens, we get emotional and we buy something or we take a cash advance, and then we have to get back on the treadmill and get more credit so that we've got insurance. Well, these two things drive each other, and they drive us further and further and further into debt. These are very typical mistakes that many, many people make. These are two of many mistakes, okay? A whole bunch of different unconscious mistakes that we make that cause us to fail with money and fail with wealth. And until we face these, learn what the mistakes are, and learn how to succeed with money and wealth, we will never succeed. So you've probably heard the phrase or the term, the elephant in the room. And the idea is that there's a big issue that no one's talking about, right? There's an elephant standing in the corner and no one's mentioning it. Well, in this case, the elephant in the room is actually a chimp in the room. It's a chimpanzee. And the chimpanzee lives inside of us, right? I call it our inner chimp. And each of us has a chimpanzee that's secretly running the controls and running our decisions and running our thoughts. And scientists and primatologists who are studying this right now are finding that we have way more in common with our chimp cousins than we ever would have guessed. And that we and they operate on the same principles, and we do many of the same things, but we don't realize it. One of the technical terms, we have what are called cognitive biases, which are ways that we're pushed and pulled unconsciously. And we're not aware that these things are affecting us. They're like a fish swimming through the water. It's not aware of the water. One of my favorite cognitive biases is that we humans are about twice as motivated by fear as we are by desire. Okay, twice as motivated by fear as we are by desire. We're twice as motivated to not lose as we are to win. And when given an opportunity to take a risk in order to win, we usually don't take it because we're afraid that something bad might happen. And this, of course, is because of the way that we're wired, the way that we evolved. Thousands of years ago, when we lived in a very different environment, if we made a mistake, we could wind up being eaten or wind up being killed. And so we became very fearful of making errors. Well, now in the modern world, where there are very few real dangers, but we're wired to look for them, we fill our mind with fears, and we make up reasons to be afraid, and we make up reasons to not act. Well, this cognitive bias, right, where we're twice as motivated by fear as we are by desire, this is something that keeps us from taking action in our lives, even though the danger that the fear used to be attached to is all but gone. We don't behave in logical, rational ways. In fact, we are what Dan Ariely calls, in his book, predictably irrational. Predictably irrational. So, we're irrational. We got the chimp inside of us that's making the decisions. We make emotional decisions that aren't good for our long term. But it's not random. We don't make random decisions. They're predictably irrational decisions. predictably. We do the same things as everyone else. We make the same money mistakes as most people. So an interesting question is money a good goal to have in the first place? Right? Is money a good goal? And I think that money used to be a good goal back when money was actually worth something in and of itself. The book Think and Grow Rich, which you've probably heard of and maybe even read, it was the original manual of success. And Think and Grow Rich is the first place that I can find in kind of the popular success literature that first talked about big money goals. And if you read the book, you remember when he talked about setting goals and writing them down and saying them to yourself and reading them to yourself and building desire for your goals. And he used examples with large amounts of money. And then after that, that really caught on, and you see money goals all over success literature. It's almost like if you're going to set a big goal, the goal should be for money. And I think and Grow Rich is where it started. Well, here's something that you probably don't know, and that is that Think and Grow Rich was published in 1937. And 1937 and the 30s was an interesting time because just 4 years before that, in 1933, President Roosevelt passed a law making it illegal in America, where I live, to own gold. And America caused all of its citizens to go and turn all their gold in. They gave them paper money in return. And then America went and sold all the gold at a huge markup and made a huge profit on it. And this was, I think, kind of the tipping point in a way that got us off of what they called the gold standard and off of using money that had real value, like gold and silver, to paper money. And over the coming decades, we switched over completely to a system called fiat currency, which is paper money and numbers on screens that are backed up by nothing except promises. And I think that's what's leading us to a lot of our challenges. So I think that money used to be a good goal, okay, when it was actually worth something. And I think that Think and Grow Rich, where it really talked about having big money goals, which kicked off this idea that we should set big money goals, sent us down a path that back then may have been good, but now that money has no intrinsic value, having a goal of getting money is counterproductive because it focuses us on the wrong thing. Paper money, fiat money, it doesn't have intrinsic value. The value goes up and down. We can't control it, and it really is counterproductive. It's like having the goal of going to a really nice restaurant to look at the menu rather than going to the restaurant to eat the food that's there. And we're confusing the menu with the food. We're confusing money with things that actually have real value, assets, wealth, and this is causing us a lot of problems. So what is a good goal then? Well, you don't control the value of money, and you never will. Okay? You and I will never be in control of monetary policy for our countries. We'll never be in control of if we live in America, of the Federal Reserve, okay, or of a huge bank. If you're going to set a wealth goal in this day and age, set it around creating something valuable that you can impact and that you can control directly in some way. Okay, so you don't control the value of money, but if you're going to set a wealth goal, set it to create something valuable that you can control directly. Set a goal to create something that becomes more valuable over time and that creates more value over time. Not to get money, but to create something that becomes more valuable over time and that creates more value over time. Wealth, in my view, is created by a machine, something that works for you. So we drew the distinction, wealth isn't money, but it's interesting, wealth tends to spin off money as it grows. Okay, so wealth isn't money, but wealth spins off money as it grows. I noticed years ago when I read the Forbes 400 that all of the billionaires listed there, next to their name, it didn't say money. It didn't say cash, right? It said things like Microsoft. Okay, like if you look at Bill Gates' profile, it doesn't say Bill Gates $57 billion and then money. It says Bill Gates $57 billion in Microsoft. He doesn't have $57 billion, right? You really got to get that. He has a bunch of Microsoft stock and other investments, that if you were to sell them on the market right now, you'd be able to get $57 billion in cash, and that's an estimated amount. Bill didn't go and sell all that stuff and then get a bunch of $100 bills and bury them underneath his huge house. Okay, he doesn't have $57 billion. He has things that have real value, which money, again, doesn't have real value anymore. Okay, there isn't anything backing it up. And his Microsoft stock, as it grows, it spins off value. Okay, as it grows, it becomes more valuable. It pays dividends, etc. My first experience with machines kind of that do work for me was when I first got into business. For the first 7 years of my life, kind of in the job and business world, I had a job. I did manual labor. It was a very cool job, but I started out making $3 or $4 an hour. And at my height, I was making $10 an hour into my early 20s. And you know, I was a long-haired rock and roll guitar player, trying to make it as a guitar player. And after several years of that, I realized that wasn't working. I needed to do something to make money, right? I wanted to be successful. So I went and I got a real estate license because it appeared to me that people that had money and that were wealthy, somehow it always had something to do with real estate, or so it seemed to me. And it also seemed like real estate agents, right, all were making $100,000 a year and driving fancy new cars. So I got my real estate license and a little dose of reality when in my first year, I think I sold 1 1/3 homes, which, I made a couple $1,000s the whole year in real estate. Fortunately, I was able to keep my part-time manual labor job on the side. But that really showed me, okay, things are a little different than they seem. Well, one thing that happened is I went to a seminar where there was a real estate trainer. And at the seminar, he sold a binder full of advertisements that you could buy and you could go run them in your own real estate business to get clients. And I thought, well, that's a great idea. So I went and I bought this binder of ads and I copied one of the ads and I ran it. And back then, it was, I think, a few $100 to run the ad. And that was real money to me. If you can imagine if I made a couple $1,000s my whole first year, the few $100 to run the ad was a big experiment. So the ad was a picture of a director's chair with kind of a spotlight on it and no one sitting in it. And underneath it had a headline that said something to the effect of, Eben Pagan is far too busy out selling real estate to pose for pictures. And I thought that was really cute. It had my phone number underneath it. And I thought, people will see that and they'll understand I'm not like normal realtors. I'm not trying to pose for pictures and look good. What I'm doing is out helping clients buy and sell real estate. Well, as you can probably guess, what happened is I got exactly 0 calls. Okay, no one called me wanting to buy or sell real estate. A couple of my friends called me up and said, hey, I saw your ad. That was really good. Okay, but no one called me up and actually wanted to buy and sell real estate. Well, then I went to a different real estate training, another seminar, with a guy named Joe Stump, who runs a company called Buy Referral Only. And he was teaching what's called direct response advertising. And I had never seen this kind of advertising before. And I watched this seminar, had a couple of big ahas, went home that night, and started working on a new ad. And I went and I ran this other ad, and I spent the same amount, maybe a few $100s, running this other advertisement. But this one was completely different. No picture. This one had a big headline and body copy, and it's at the top it said, free report reveals the 7 most expensive mistakes to avoid when buying or selling a home in Eugene, Oregon, which is the little city that I grew up in, lived near. Well, I ran this ad, and it had very different results. Okay, I remember being home in my little, 400 or 500 square foot trailer, my first place, and the phone kept ringing, and our receptionist from the real estate office kept calling me to tell me that people were calling and they wanted this report, and she was transferring them to me and taking their information. And what I realized at that moment is not only that there's a better way to do advertising, but I also had the first experience of having something out in the world doing work while I was sleeping, doing work for me while I was doing my manual labor job, doing work for me while I was helping someone buy a home. Okay, it was working and I didn't have to. And now, later on in my life, after many tried and failed business experiments, now I'm a machine builder. I'm not a money maker. Okay, I don't do things to make money, and I'm not focused on getting money. What I'm focused on is building machines, acquiring assets, things that grow in value and throw off value. And I think it's an important lesson that we could all learn something valuable from. So build your machine. Don't focus on just making money. Remember, wealth and money are two different things. Focusing on getting money and spending the money that comes in, these result in no money. And of course, reinvest what comes in the machine. Reinvest building the machine. It's important that you take what you earn and you invest it in building your assets and building your wealth, not on spending it on things. Okay, so if money isn't a good goal, here are some key money and machine goals. The first is knowledge and skills in a field that is growing in demand and value. Knowledge and skills in a field that's growing in demand and value. I mentioned earlier that most people that graduate from college, they don't work in their field. Okay, that's kind of a tragedy. Why is that? Well, it's because no one who was experienced sat them down and said, build your knowledge and your skills in a field that's going to grow in demand and grow in value in the future. I ask you right now, if I kind of put a gun to your head, so to speak, and pulled out a piece of paper and I said, write down the top 10 fields, the top 10 business areas that are going to have the most growth, that projected to grow the most in the next 10 to 20 years. How many of them would you get right? I think you'd be pretty surprised if you saw the list. Okay, most of us would not get them right. And by the way, the business that I'm in, which is online education and teaching information products and so forth, it's in that list of top 10, and it's not a coincidence. The next good money and machine goal to have is a profitable, growing business machine in an industry that's just hitting its growth curve. Right? So I think that everyone should build a business. You may have to try a few of them before you find the one that works. I know I did. But make sure that you build it in an industry that's just hitting its growth curve, not one that's on its way down. Okay, you don't want to start a buggy whip business, and you don't want to start a compact disc business right now. Okay, those are either gone or on their way down. You want to get one that's just hitting its growth curve. And then the final is assets. Asset machines that will grow in value over the coming years that you understand. This is very critical. This is an idea we'll talk a little bit more about, but you want to buy assets that grow in value, but assets you understand. Okay, some people will say, well, I understand real estate. You buy a home for $200,000, you get a $1,500 a month payment of your mortgage and your insurance and all your expenses. You rent it out for $1,700 a month, so now you've got $200 a month of cash flow. And then your renter pays off the mortgage, and 30 years later, you have it free and clear. So you got passive income, and you got equity that you're building. Well, that's not an understanding of the real estate industry. Okay, that's an understanding of maybe one of the rules of monopoly. Okay, that would get you through, maybe a good game of Monopoly. But it will not allow you to build wealth. And little superficial understandings or looking what other people are doing, these are the kinds of things that will get us into trouble. So you actually have to understand the assets that you're buying if you want to succeed with them long term. So there are really three parts of your wealth machine that you're building, three different levels. First is your knowledge and understanding of how money and wealth work. So you remember when I said earlier, you need words in order to make sentences, and then you need sentences in order to make paragraphs, and then paragraphs in order to make books. Well, your first level, the words, so to speak, your vocabulary, is your knowledge and understanding of how money and wealth work. Most people do not understand money. They haven't studied the history of money. They don't understand where it came from. They don't understand assets and wealth. They haven't made it something that they're personally taking responsible for. So the first key piece of your wealth machine, your knowledge and understanding of how money and wealth work. The second key piece of your wealth machine is identifying your own personal marketable talents and connecting them with the real world. Each of us is born with unique gifts. Some of us are gifted mentally, some of us are gifted emotionally, some of us are gifted physically. Each of us has unique talents. We all have them, all have these natural intelligences, but what most of us haven't done is identified the ones that are the most marketable and then connected them with opportunities in the real world where they can get paid the most to do their talents, to do what they're good at. So this is the next level. Once you understand money and wealth, then you have to understand and identify your own marketable talents and connect them to the real world where you're doing them in the real world, creating value and having that value turn into money, which you can then take and invest in business assets and build wealth. And then the final piece is a business or investment, some asset that you can build. You need a machine that you can build. You take your knowledge and your understanding of money and wealth, and then you take your own natural talents that you've developed, that you figured out how to get to interact with the real world to create value, and you use those two to build your business or build your investment over time. That's where you keep reinvesting. And when you have these three parts nailed, that's when I think you really have a high probability of being able to create self-made wealth. So how do we get so off track? There are a couple of pervasive myths in our modern culture. One of them is, do what you love and the money will follow. And the second is, build it and they will come. Okay, so the title of a book and a famous line from a movie. Do what you love and the money will follow. Build it and they will come. And we really want to believe these things because they sound so romantic and they sound like the way that it should be. I mean, this is the way it should be. This is the way it's supposed to be. You should do what you love and the money will follow. You should just be able to build your business and people will come to it. Well, the problem with these is that it doesn't happen that way most of the time. Most of the time when you do what you love, but you didn't have any financial education and you didn't make the connection between what you love and the opportunities in the world, you don't have money. Okay? The money doesn't follow you. You're always following the money, and money controls your life. And build it and they will come. Most of the time when we borrow money or we use our own money to start a business or we start a retail store and we put a whole bunch of money into it thinking it has to work, most of the time it doesn't work. Most businesses fail. This is not the way the world works. But we don't know that. No one tells us this. They tell us, do what you love and the money will follow, and build it and they will come. And this usually costs us years or decades of progress. Next, most of us aren't on track to build wealth because we didn't have any good wealth role models. We humans are very, very impressionable. Our personalities are basically a patchwork quilt of little pieces and snippets that we borrowed from others that we put together that we call our personality. And when you really think about it, all the treasured things that you say, your sayings, even your treasured beliefs, they all have their roots in some role model somewhere, whether it was a book, whether it was someone in your life, somewhere you were imitating someone and that's where you got that. Now, most of us didn't have good wealth role models when we were growing up. We weren't mentored by billionaires who taught us from a young age how to think about money, what it was, how it worked, how to build successful businesses, how to acquire assets. We just didn't learn this stuff. And we also never got good educations about it. If you've seen some of my other videos, you see that people who had good role models, people who learned for years about money and wealth, do very, very well in business. And then when you combine this with our inner chimpanzee and our chimp drive to consume everything now, whether it's in front of us or whether we have to borrow it, this results in average income, average debt, average life. Okay, and the average is getting older, getting to retirement age, and being an average of basically broke, basically dependent on others, and basically dependent on the government to take care of you. So a couple little tidbits here. Follow Warren's advice. And the Warren I'm talking about is Warren Buffett, the great investor, probably the most famous and the best investor of all time. And what Warren says is, Make few investments. Make few investments. Only invest in things that you understand, and know the most important consideration, and it's not what you think it is. So make few investments. Warren Buffett says when we get out of school, we should be given a little card that has 20 little punch holes in it, and you could get it punched, and you can only make 20 investments in your life. Every time you make an investment, one of the holes gets punched. You can only make 20 investments. Why is that a wise thing? It's wise because if you could only make 20, you would think very carefully about every single one of them. Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, who's Warren's partner at Berkshire Hathaway, they say that they only look for one good investment per year. Okay, one investment per year. Next, only invest in things that you understand. Warren Buffett likes to invest in things like restaurants and furniture stores and Gillette razors and Coca-Cola, things that he understands. They also own a big insurance company, which is something that he understands. In the technology bubble in the 1990s, a lot of people criticized Warren Buffett and left Berkshire Hathaway to go invest in the technology stocks, and they said, "You're an idiot. You should be buying these stocks because they're valuable." And Warren Buffett said, "I don't understand technology, and so I'm not going to buy something I don't understand." Well, when the technology bubble burst and the market crashed, people lost their life savings. Many people who had been saving for decades lost most or all of it. And Warren Buffett, of course, was smiling because he didn't understand it. He didn't get involved in it. For Bill Gates, one of Warren Buffett's best friends, he said, it's fine for him to be invested in technology because Bill Gates understands technology. He built Microsoft. And if it's good enough for Warren Buffett to only invest in things that he understands, I think it's good enough for us too. And then finally, know the most important consideration or the key factor when deciding on an investment. It's opportunity cost. Okay, it's not return, it's not interest rate, it's not risk. It's opportunity cost. What's opportunity cost? Opportunity cost is what else could you have done with the money or with the value? What opportunities are you passing up because you're buying the thing you're buying or investing in the thing you're investing in? And this is a really interesting one because, we often take money that we made or value that we created doing something that we understand, and then we go invest it in something we don't understand. So a doctor will go to school for 10 years and get an MD and then take another 10 years building a practice and get to the point where, he or she is making $250,000 a year, and then take $50,000 and go invest it in the stock market, which they don't understand at all because some quote-unquote investment advisor told them that it was a good investment. And by the way, to take that $50,000 out, they had to take $100,000 out of their business because they had to give half to the government first. Well, this is insanity, okay? It's crazy to invest in things that you don't understand. The opposite of it would be to have someone who is a really good stock trader who makes a bunch of money in the stock market and then takes $1 million and invests it in a Hollywood movie, in an industry they don't understand. And we do this stuff all the time. And what we don't do is ask ourselves, what's the opportunity cost? So, for example, the doctor doesn't sit down and say, okay, what would happen if I took the $100,000 and instead of taking it out, paying $50,000 in taxes and then putting $50,000 in the stock market, what if I reinvested the entire $100,000 building my doctor practice? How much bigger could I grow it? The stock trader doesn't say, instead of taking the $1 million, which again, they had to take $2 million out to get the $1 million after taxes. What if I took the $2 million and I bought more assets, more stocks that I understood? When you're investing in things that you understand, okay, this is where you have a lot of power. And this is why it's so important to get a money and wealth understanding and then get an understanding of your own talents and your own kind of marketable talents and how they connect to the world before you go start investing. And finally, I think it's really important if we want to create self-made wealth that we're honest with ourselves. So let's be honest with ourselves. Winning at wealth is important, but it doesn't happen on its own. Okay, I really believe that you must take extreme measures if you want it to happen in your life. So, identify the talents you have that are also in demand in the business world and develop them. Identify the talents you have that are also in demand in the business world and develop them. Get an education and get role models of success with money and wealth. And learn about money and wealth. Make it a lifetime interest and an area of expertise that you develop. So learn about money and wealth, how we have emotional relationships with money and with wealth, how we sabotage ourselves, how our psychology works, how our limiting beliefs prevent us from creating success. So identify the talents you have that are in demand in the business world, get an education and get role models of success, and learn about money and wealth. Make it a lifetime interest. My final thought is, I don't think it's optional anymore to do these things. Even if we don't want to create wealth, I don't think that it's optional anymore. We don't live in the past where we could get a job and just do that job and expect to be able to retire in comfort. I interviewed Harvey Mackay, the author of Swim with the Sharks Without Getting Eaten Alive and a bunch of other best-selling business books. And he quoted a Bureau of Labor Statistics little stat there. It said something to the effect that someone graduating from college right now is going to have in the neighborhood of a dozen different jobs in the next 20 years. And in their career, they're going to make 3 to 5 career changes, okay, complete career changes. The world is changing faster and faster. The jobs that we have now will be gone at some point in the future because everything is changing. Just ask someone that used to make buggy whips or someone that used to make compact discs. Okay, these things are disappearing because, well, buggy whips disappeared, compact discs are disappearing because the world is changing. New technology is replacing it. And if we don't identify the talents that we have that are in demand in the business world and then keep developing them, if we don't get an education and we don't get role models of success around money and wealth, and key, we don't learn about money and wealth and make it a lifetime interest and a lifetime area of expertise that we spend 10, 20% of our time, effort, and energy on, we're going to wake up in the future left behind. On the other hand, when we do these things, I believe that we can actually take control of this area of our life. We can get money handled, and ultimately we can create self-made wealth. So I highly recommend that you do that. Whether you do it yourself, you read books, you go find mentors on your own, or you do our training, it's definitely something you want to do. If you'd like to join us, on Monday we're going to be opening up registration for a very special class of self-made wealth that is going to be a 90-day coaching and training program that includes all of the areas that we've talked about here, the best of what I've learned over almost 20 years of studying business and money and psychology and wealth, all the lessons that you can skip the years of mistakes that I made, and you can take advantage of the millions and millions of dollars that it's essentially cost me to learn this stuff by just joining me for the training. And I'll send you a link out on Monday when we open up. I hope you've gotten something out of this, and I hope you make a commitment to identify your talents, to get an education and get good role models to be around, and to really make it a lifetime interest, something where you're going to keep learning and keep developing for life, learning about money and wealth. So I hope to see you in the Self-Made Wealth program, and thank you very much for joining me for this training.